Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about how US President Trump said that Hungary's Prime Minister Orbán told him that China has beaten him in the trade war. On the other hand, China isn't holding back anymore, throwing punches at Canada and kicking the EU. China knows that playing nice just doesn't work. Trump's approach to his own allies, using tariffs to push them to invest in the US, probably inspired China. If even the US doesn't have to be polite to its allies, then China doesn't need to be too courteous either. On August 13th, the Ministry of Commerce's website announced a decision to take countermeasures against two EU financial institutions. It said that in response to the EU's sanctions on two Chinese financial institutions, and with approval from the National Anti-Foreign Sanctions Coordination Mechanism, China has decided to add the EU's UAB Urbo Bankas and AB Mano Bankas to its countermeasure list. The following countermeasures will be implemented. Organizations and individuals within China are prohibited from engaging in any related transactions or cooperation with them. Both of these banks that China is countering have their headquarters in Vilnius, Lithuania. According to informed sources, the total assets of these two banks are 670 million euros, which is about 5.6 billion renminbi, and 450 million euros, which is about 3.78 billion renminbi, roughly equivalent to a smaller rural commercial bank in China. Their scale is similar to the two Chinese financial institutions that were first put on the EU sanctions list last month. As for Lithuania, according to internal Chinese sources, the Taiwan issue has already become a target for Chinese sanctions. In November 2021, Lithuania approved the establishment of the so-called Lithuanian-Taiwan Representative Office by the Taiwan authorities, and immediately announced the downgrading of bilateral diplomatic relations with Lithuania to the chargé d'affaires level. In August 2022, China imposed sanctions on Lithuania's Deputy Minister of Transport and Communications, Vaisio Kavishijūt, suspending all forms of engagement with Lithuania's Ministry of Transport and halting cooperation in the field of international road transport. According to China's Ministry of Commerce, this time China. The background to putting two EU banks on the anti-sanctions list is that, on July 18 this year, during the EU's 18th round of sanctions against Russia, two Chinese financial institutions were included in the sanctions list. The EU's reason at the time was that these two Chinese financial institutions were involved in helping Russia evade sanctions. China has now changed its previously gentlemanly approach towards Western countries, and another target is Canada. On August 12, the Ministry of Commerce announced that the investigating authorities had preliminarily determined that imported canola paper originating from Canada was being dumped, causing substantial harm to China's domestic canola paper industry, and that there was a causal relationship between dumping and the actual damage. Starting from August 24, a 75.8% deposit will be imposed on canola paper imported from Canada, and these canola paper imports must pay the deposit first. On the same day, the Ministry of Commerce also launched an anti-dumping investigation into imported pea starch originating from Canada. Beijing emphasized that the anti-dumping investigation is a mechanism initiated after receiving complaints, in line with WTO rules, and is a legitimate trade measure to protect domestic industries. He also said that China's anti-dumping investigation into imported pea starch from Canada is fundamentally different from the recent discriminatory measures taken by Canada against China that violate WTO rules. The Ministry of Commerce was referring to Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau's announcement on July 16 this year that, in order to protect domestic manufacturers, Canada would tighten restrictions, including those on China. For steel products from non-free trade agreement countries, the import quota this year must be cut in half, and any amount exceeding the quota will be subject to an additional 50% tariff. As for steel products imported from countries other than the United States, as long as they contain Chinese melted steel, or steel that is processed in China, a 25% tariff will also be imposed starting from today. Canada is currently affected by the additional tariffs imposed by the United States and has not been able to reach a trade agreement with Trump. The Canadian Prime Minister, Carney, had previously introduced a series of measures such as imposing tariffs on Chinese steel, aiming to please Trump. However, China had already made it clear that no country is allowed to harm China's interests. As a bargaining chip in negotiations with the US, China will definitely defend its own interests, and now has finally taken countermeasures. These Western countries seem to take China's goodwill for granted and don't appreciate it. Take Canada as an example. After the US and China imposed tariffs on each other in April this year, China significantly reduced its imports of agricultural and energy products from the US, and instead increased its purchases from other countries. Canada was one of the main beneficiaries. In May this year, Chinese buyers ramped up their wheat purchases from Canada and Australia, buying between 400,000 and 510,000 tons of wheat. In addition, the US once stopped selling butadiene to China. Even though the US relaxed export restrictions after tensions in China-US trade eased, many Chinese plastics factories were still unwilling to resume imports. As a result, US butadiene buyers have turned to Canada instead. After Prime Minister Carney took office, he did not take the opportunity to quickly improve relations with China. And on top of that, his stance on Chinese steel imports has angered China. China feels that Carney is using this as an excuse to curry favor with Trump and go against China. When China is stepping up its purchases from you, you turn around and further restrict our imports. Isn't that the behavior of an unfriendly partner? On another note, looking at how the EU keeps going back and forth on the electric vehicle tariff negotiations without getting anywhere, now China and the US have already achieved significant results after 3 rounds of talks. Meanwhile, the EU is still dragging its feet and can't make up its mind. In my view, negotiating and making deals with a straight shooter like Trump is actually easier than dealing with hypocrites like von der Leyen. That's how I'd sum it up. First, the Ministry of Commerce has been very blunt in its actions against Canada and the EU, not holding back at all. It seems China has realized that being the good guy gets you nowhere. If China treats you with courtesy and you don't accept it, then don't blame us for playing hardball. Second, Trump's tactics towards his allies, and the way those allies respond, have also given China some food for thought. These countries only bully the weak and fear the strong. Being nice to them is pointless. Just look at how the EU, under Trump's threats, quickly signed a humiliating trade agreement and made sweeping concessions to him. So China isn't afraid to be tougher with them either. Besides, sometimes Trump actually tells the truth. Before the US-Alaska summit, Trump actually revealed that he had sought advice from Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán. At the White House press conference on the 11th, Trump was asked about the prospects if the US-Korea meeting went smoothly. Trump gave a definite answer when asked whether the US and Russia might resume normal trade relations. He said the prerequisite is that Russia must shift its focus from war to business development. He then mentioned that he had consulted a very, very smart person about the issue of avoiding conflict, and that person was Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán, who has a close personal relationship with both Trump and the right-wing camp. Trump said that Orbán is familiar with the conflict zones and understands both countries well. He recalled that when he asked Orbán whether Ukraine could defeat Russia, Orbán looked at him as if to say, "Why would you ask such a silly question here?" According to Trump, Orbán then compared Russia's military experience with China's trade power. Trump quoted Orbán as saying this. Orbán said that Russia wins everything their country needs for survival through war, while China defeats you in trade, and Russia defeats you through war. When Trump recounted these words, he acted a bit nonchalant, saying that Orbán had made some very interesting points. However, Orbán's hint that the US is falling behind in trade with China clearly touched a nerve with Trump. Right after Trump let that slip, he quickly tried to cover it up. He said, "China won't beat us through trade, at least not while I'm in office. Only Biden would lose to China." Then he went on again about high tariffs, saying they could bring in huge tariff revenue for the US, and that the US has the upper hand in negotiations because of him. It was the same old lines, repeating over and over. In the middle of all that, he actually forgot he was supposed to be answering questions about the US-Russia summit. When it came to the issue of suspending tariffs on China, Trump just brushed it off at the press conference, saying let's wait and see and cooperation is going well, giving only brief responses. Then he quickly called on the next reporter to ask a different question. You could see it this way. Trump quoted Orbán for his own benefit, telling the reporters present that any smart person knows Ukraine can't possibly beat Russia, so that's why he wants to meet with Putin to discuss peace in Ukraine. As for saying that China wants to defeat you, you could call that a Freudian slip. He accidentally let the truth slip out.